this is Naturalist Lauren, and today I want to share a story with you about some sandhill cranes that I saw on a hike the other day. I wanted to go outside because it's spring migration and I live close to the Crow River, and since there's a lot of activity going on by the water, I thought it would be a good place to go look for some birds. Now, during my hike, it actually took me kind of close to this farmer who lives not too far from my neighborhood. And when I was walking by the fields, I noticed these two big gray boulders in the middle of his field. And I thought it was kind of weird that he had these big boulders in the middle of his field. And then all of a sudden, they started to move. Turned out those two boulders were actually sandhill cranes. And I got really excited because I had my camera with me and I wanted to see if I could get some pictures. But they were moving away, so I needed to follow them to see if I could get a little bit closer. And then when I was following them, this giant bird decided to fly into the area. Some naturalists, when they see a bird like that flying in the air, they can identify it just based on its shape and how it's moving. But I am not one of those naturalists. So even though I was still interested in my sandhill cranes and I wanted to see what they were up to, now I was distracted because I wanted to figure out what kind of bird this was. Luckily, it made some noises that let me know what it was. That is actually the sound that a red-tailed hawk makes. Awesome. So now that I had confirmed it was a red-tailed hawk, I could go back to figuring out wherever the sandhill cranes had gone. And they had worked their way into this sort of grassy wetland area looking for food. But they were actually still listening to this red-tailed hawk while they were eating because he kept making noise. Not long after, the red-tailed hawk decided to fly away, and I decided I was going to move and sort of start working my way back. But very quickly after that, the male started showing courtship displays, and I got really excited and quickly turned my camera back on. For those of you who don't know, sandhill cranes, when they're trying to impress a mate and hopefully breed to have babies, their courtship displays consist of intricate dance moves. They jump up in the air and they throw their heads back, and in this case the male was throwing grass around, and so it was really fun to get to watch, but she was not having it, so he eventually stopped and didn't really start again. Now, I didn't know that they were done with their courtship displays, so I'll admit I followed them around a little bit longer just in case they would do it again. But I did notice around this point how amazing sandhill crane camouflage actually is. Because if you recall, when I first found these birds, they looked like big boulders, big rocks in the middle of a farmer's field. But then we were standing in this grassy wetland, and most of the colors around us were yellow, but they could blend pretty seamlessly in with the yellow background. And eventually, when a bunch of shrubs, these tall shrubby bushes, got between myself and the cranes, they could even blend in behind those, and unless they were moving, it became very difficult for me to be able to find those birds, even though they're 5 feet tall. So camouflage for them works pretty well, which surprised me, because if you look at these birds up close, they have a bright red forehead, they've got really long, skinny, dark legs, and their bodies are basically covered in gray and rusty brown feathers. So it doesn't look like they'd blend in very well with anything, but it seems like they can blend in pretty well with everything. So I continued to follow them around a little bit longer, and they had been pretty patient with me up until this point. For the most part, they were very calm and didn't really seem to care much that I was there, which I admit made me a little bold, and I decided I was going to see if I could get a little bit closer because I wanted to get a couple closer pictures. But that was the point where I crossed the line, and basically the male sandhill crane yelled at me. Ooh, don't hear that. I took that to be a pretty fair warning, and at that point I did start to slowly walk away. But then, and I did not plan this, another sandhill crane, one, maybe two, off in the distance, started making calls, which then made my two sandhill cranes that I'd been following start to respond in what is referred to as a unison call, where essentially the cranes will talk in unison to claim a territory or tell other birds that, you're not supposed to come here because we're here. It felt really special to hear that call, and it made the reality of how important territory is to Sandhill Cranes very much apparent, because Sandhill Cranes spend their time in the south, the southern part of the United States, or even parts of northern Mexico in the winter. The two migratory birds, the lesser sandhill crane and the greater sandhill crane, end up flying north into the northern United States and parts of Canada for breeding and nesting. And they had come a very long way to get to this nice little spot that I was invading in. And obviously, they went a long way to protect it and defend it from other cranes taking over. So that was really the turning point where I decided it was time for me to leave. Once I had walked home, I immediately started researching Sandhill Cranes because I had all of these questions bouncing around in my brain about some of the things I had just seen, and I learned some pretty interesting things. First, I learned about the food that they like to eat is part of why the Sandhill Cranes were next to the farmer's field, because as a rule, Sandhill Cranes like to spend time in open prairies and farmers' fields because they like to eat grains. They'll also eat things like frogs and snakes, like small amphibians, reptiles, and even small mammals, but for the most part, they like to eat those seeds and those grains, which is why they had selected this spot. The other thing I learned about, which I thought was kind of interesting, is sandhill cranes are something called monomorphic, which basically means that it's really hard to tell the difference between a male and a female. Now, I thought that when I was out there, I had identified the male because he was a little bit bigger than the female and because he had more brighter plumage, more orange, but turns out that's really not a way to distinguish. Frankly, the only big giveaway that allowed me to distinguish properly was the fact that the male did his courtship dance and the fact that the male also did that warning signal to keep me away. Plus, when we did the unison call, and I studied this later, the male was the one that was holding his head up straight, doing that one single note, and the female was the one that responded with two quick notes afterwards. I think it's safe to say that this trip has solidified a lifelong interest in sandhill cranes for me because it was really special getting to see them so close and getting to share some of those special moments with them, and I look forward to hopefully going back to see if they're still there. Obviously, if they're looking for nesting spots and hoping to have babies, I'm not going to get too close. I'm going to give them their space, but you never know what you're going to find, and I hope that they have good luck this breeding season. So thank you all for joining me for my adventure story, and I hope that you can go out and find your own adventure. See you next time.